Hi all, how we doing? I just wanted to start this set of slides, and I'm not going to comment on every slide. I don't feel the need to here. It's not as incredibly technical. I'm just going to focus on the things that are tricky to understand and confusing. So I wanted to start with this just as a kind of an introduction. By now in class, I probably did a kind of a family tree of somebody, and we separated the question of how things happen, life comes about, life changes, how things happen, as opposed to who or what might be responsible. And I frame that as a question that unfortunately um, some find hard to separate those as two separate questions. But I thought I'd show you a couple of little quotes here. Here's one that Darwin ended his book with, his great book on the origin of species, um, that introduced an evolutionary outlook to the world, basically. Darwin was often seen as being anti-religious because he basically claimed that instead of a supernatural creation, which I'll expound on the next slide in just a second, Darwin said, we have figured out how that can be done, and it doesn't need a puff of smoke, supernatural, bam, create whatever kind of living things. I think we can start to figure out how that can happen using this process we call science, but it doesn't take a creator out of the picture at all. In fact, this is what this statement by Darwin was saying. His revelations, Darwin's, made him more religious than he was at the beginning. And I'll go to the next slide and look at Louis Pasteur saying the same thing. A little bit of science distances you from God if you don't understand that science is just trying to answer the how question and not the who or what question. It might seem like, since you figured out that human beings, for instance, came about in a different way than puff of smoke in the Garden of Eden, if you figure that out, that might at the surface seem to distance you from God. But if you really understand it, it produces in your mind a creator that is astonishing, brings you nearer to him. Now, all this stuff is quite personal to all people, but I just wanted to start. I always like to start with that um, statement that understanding how living things got here, that for instance, cats and dogs and pine trees and you, that they could have all been created in a puff of smoke, just like they are, but the evidence now is overwhelming that all those things came from a single beginning, and it's the similarities in all those things that have suggested that to us. And we've talked about a whole bunch of those already, mainly DNA sequence similarities that suggest that, you know what, this is an astonishing creator. Starting with one kind of living thing, this creator created all these different living things, and we have figured out a good bit of the process of how that creator did that. And that's what brings you nearer to the creator in Louis Pasteur's mind. He was pretty smart, by the way. So, just one more famous person here, Martin Luther King, kind of said the same thing this way. Science and religion are complementary. They are not rivals at all. They do good things for each other, so to speak. If your whole view of medicine, and I'll just use medicine as an example, if your whole view of medicine is based on irrational, superstitious, um, supernatural, we need to drive the evil spirits out of this person, as opposed to figure out what is actually causing this disease or whatever, and try a way that we can test and figure out how to fix, then you're in that that valley of crippling irrationality, in Martin Luther King's words. And what religion does is keep science from becoming too, I don't know if materialistic's the right word. It's probably, well, he uses it here, but just life having no meaning. Um, Without a little dash of religion, um, then it, life could evolve into that, so to speak. See what I just did there? Hi, so I'll just make some short comments about each one of these categories of evidence for evolution, just so we're clear. Why is this evidence for evolution? So we start with the one that was the first evidence for evolution, and that was the discovery of all these kinds of creatures that aren't around anymore. That in itself is change, right? So that's one thing. Their mere existence tells us that different living things used to have been on the earth in the past. And then the fact that there's similarities between those living things and modern things, and that as we find more fossils, we can put together a very clear picture of what kind of changes most likely occurred when ancient 100 million year old species A looks like it might have evolved into species B because of similarities, and then C and D, right? This is not a special creation kind of story that D was created, specially just like we find them today. So this story, the fact that these exist, suggesting a change over time, is what evolution is, right? From this kind of organism to this kind of organism, its descendants, right? And that they're different as time goes by, just like you're different than your great 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 grandfather in a smaller sense. Their very existence is then evidence for an evolutionary process as opposed to a special kind of creation process.